Hey guys, Edward here from Edward279, the Mixed Content Creator. The European Union, an economic alliance between a grand total of 27 member states, sorry UK, and combines the markets of its member states into one major market on the world stage. But what is it that defines each country of the European Union and makes each one unique in its own ways? This is part one of a series in which I explain every country that's currently a member in the EU. Sorry, UK, but Brexit was your fault after all. So without further ado, let's get into it. Belgium. A constitutional monarchy smashed between the likes of fellow EU members France, Germany, and the Netherlands. Belgium's three primary languages are rather predictable due to its neighbors. The two primarily spoken languages of Belgium are Dutch, spoken in the northern region of Flanders, and French, spoken in the southern region of Wallonia, or as some people know it, the Walloon territory. And then the third main language, German, is much less common, and only really spoken in the areas bordering Germany and the far east of the country. Like most countries in Europe, Belgium is, religion-wise, predominantly Christian, but more specifically predominantly Catholic, similar to its southern neighbor France as opposed to heavy Protestant influence in the Netherlands and northern Germany. But like its neighbor the Netherlands, Belgium is a constitutional monarchy, in which the ruling monarch has basically no political power, and the role is essentially really only ceremonial. Instead, most of the political power is held by an elected official, which in Belgium's case is the Prime Minister. The Belgian flag has 3 vertical stripes, with the colors being in order from left to right, or vice versa, because I honestly couldn't care less. Black, yellow, and red. And no, it does not look like a sideways German flag, as the order of Germany's flag colors from top to bottom goes black, red, gold, while the color order of a sideways Belgian flag goes black, a lighter shade of yellow, and red. Economically, Belgium is about average, with the country having both the 7th largest economy in the EU in terms of overall GDP, and being the 7th richest country in the organization in terms of GDP per capita, but the aligning numbers are more than likely just a coincidence. The country, like most EU members, uses the euro as its currency, and the nation's capital, Brussels, is actually where the headquarters of both NATO and the EU are located, and the country was a founding member of both organizations. Belgium, alongside the other quote-unquote inner 6 countries, which I'll talk about later, founded the European Economic Community via the Treaty of Rome in 1957, which would eventually lead to the modern European Union in 1993. France. The first major European republic in history, and another one of the inner 6 countries that initially founded the economic community that would become the EU. France, like Belgium, was a founding member of both NATO and the EU, even though, as I said earlier, the headquarters of both organizations are in Brussels, Belgium. Now, compared to many of its neighbors, France became a republic much sooner than the rest of Europe via the French Revolution, and since then, France has had a long history of strong republicanism. Hell, the nation's literal national day on July 14 celebrates one of the key events of the French Revolution, the storming of a prison in Paris by a name you've probably heard of, the Bastille. Like basically all other European republics, France has both a president, which is the head of state, and a prime minister, which is the head of the government, with both president and prime minister being elected officials. The French flag has that classic tricolor you probably all know and love, which goes from left to right, or right to left, because honestly I couldn't care less. It's blue, white, and red. These 3 colors were symbolic of of republicanism in France during the French Revolution. And even today, this trifecta of colors still have strong symbolism as a symbol of a thriving French Republic. However, there are technically two versions of the French flag. The first is this one right here that has a lighter color scheme, while the other version, which I do not have on display, it has a darker color scheme. As for language, of course, French is the only official language, though there are several other regional languages that are also recognized by the French government. The country's capital of Paris is extremely well known all over the world, especially now at the time I'm filming this due to the 2024 Olympic Games being held there. However, France also has other notably large cities, including Marseille, Lyon, Toulouse, Strasbourg, and Bordeaux. But even of France's large metropolitan areas, Paris still stands out as the largest city in the nation by a country mile, and by far the most well-known of France's large urban areas outside of France. And although the country is predominantly Christian, but more specifically Catholic, France also has a notable Muslim minority, with followers of the Islamic faith making up anywhere from 4 to 10% of the French population. As for currency and the economy, like most of the EU, France uses the euro and has the second largest economy in terms of overall GDP in the post-Brexit EU, only behind Germany's. In terms of GDP per capita, though, France just barely squeezes into the top 10, with France in 11th place in the EU for GDP per capita. France, being one of the inner six nations, was one of the 6 founding members of what would become the EU, the EEC, which was founded by the Treaty of Rome in 1957. Luxembourg. The second smallest member of the EU in terms of area, only behind Malta, Luxembourg might be small, but it's also so filthy rich, with Luxembourg having the highest GDP per capita in the entire European Union. In terms of overall GDP and size of economy, however, the country's size is more of a detriment than a benefit, as the nation actually has the 8th smallest economy in the EU in terms of overall GDP. Currency-wise, Luxembourg, being an EU member, uses the euro, though not all countries in the European Union do. In terms of government, Luxembourg is technically a constitutional monarchy, but instead of having a king or queen like most other European constitutional monarchies, the country instead has a Grand Duke, making it the only Grand Duchy in the entire world. And while the Luxembourgish Grand Duke isn't a total figurehead like other European monarchs, the vast majority of the political power still falls in the hands of an elected official, that being the Prime Minister. Religion-wise, Luxembourg, like most of Europe, is predominantly Christian, with the Christian population of the country being overwhelmingly Catholic. And as for languages, Luxembourgish is the main official language, but there are 2 other official languages in Luxembourg, French and German, though English and even Portuguese aren't too rare either, as I mentioned in my video about the countries in Europe with the most English speakers. Link to that in the description below. Strangely enough, the capital of Luxembourg is named, well, Luxembourg, though some people prefer to say Luxembourg City, likely to differentiate between the country and the capital city of said country. As for the nation's flag, it's 3 horizontal stripes, with the colors being, from top to bottom, red, white, and blue. It's similar to, but not identical to, the Dutch flag, as the flag of Luxembourg generally has a much lighter color scheme than the Dutch flag, which in general has a much darker color scheme. Another one of the inner six nations, Luxembourg was yet another founding member of the European Economic Community, which would eventually become the EU. Germany. The economic beating heart of the EU, right in the center of the alliance. Germany was not only one of the founding members of the EEC, which would become the EU, and uses the euro like most of the European Union, but is also economically really impressive, with Germany having the largest economy in the EU and Europe and third largest economy worldwide, passing Japan and being only behind China and the US. In terms of GDP per capita, though, Germany is less impressive, but still very much so, with Germany having the 9th largest GDP per capita in the European Union. As for governance, the nation is a republic, with the Federal Republic of Germany, or Bundesrepublik Deutschland in German, having both a president and a chancellor, which is essentially the equivalent of a prime minister but under a different name. Now, unlike France, which is a semi-presidential republic, Germany is a parliamentary republic, in which the chancellor isn't elected by the people directly, but by whichever party has the most seats in the Bundestag, or the legislative institution of the German government, and that is directly elected by the people. Unlike in presidential or semi-presidential republics, Germany's parliamentary republic means that the head of state, that is, the German president, has basically no political power, and the role is largely ceremonial, while the chancellor is actually the one that holds the political power. Linguistically, German is the only official language, though there are several regional dialects that I am not going to go into. And religion-wise, there's a pretty even split. Northern Germany is predominantly Protestant, while southern Germany, primarily the states of Baden-Württemberg and Bavaria, is predominantly Catholic. And then there's the former East Germany, which has the highest concentration of non-religious people in the country. Never mind a sizable Muslim minority due to immigration from the Muslim world. And going back to economy, it's also a pretty uneven split, with the former East Germany being nowhere near as prosperous as the West, though the East slowly but surely is catching up in that regard. This divide can also be seen in the German capital Berlin, with the former West Berlin in general being more prosperous than the former East Berlin, and cities in the West like Munich, Hamburg, Nuremberg, and Frankfurt tending to be larger and richer than cities in East Germany, like Erfurt, Magdeburg, Potsdam, and Dresden. As for the flag, the design is simple. 3 horizontal stripes with the colors from top to bottom being black, red, and gold. Yet another founding member of the European Economic Community, Germany was another nation in the inner 6 original founders of the EEC, the predecessor to the EU. The Netherlands. Incorrectly referred to as Holland by some, the Netherlands primarily speaks, well, Dutch. But the thing is, the language is slowly starting to decline as English becomes incredibly widespread in the country. This does not mean Dutch is in danger of dying by any means, as Dutch is still widely spoken in the Netherlands, and in some other areas, like Flanders, which is the Dutch-speaking part of Belgium, and even the former Dutch colony of Suriname, despite the widespread speaking of English by Dutch people. Like in a lot of Northern Europe, non-religion is really common in the Netherlands, with over half the Dutch population being atheist, agnostic, or otherwise irreligious. Apart from irreligious people, the next largest group are Catholics, coming in at a not at all close second, then Protestants, followers of other Christian denominations, Muslims, and finally followers of other religions. Like neighboring Belgium, the Netherlands is a constitutional monarchy in which the ruling monarch, which is the head of state, is really almost only ceremonial, while the Prime Minister, which is the head of government, has the bulk of, if not all, of the political power. The Dutch capital Amsterdam is also really well known worldwide, though probably not as well known as some other European capitals like Athens, Rome, London, Moscow, or Paris, but is still far more well known than some other Dutch cities like Groningen and Utrecht. The flag of the Netherlands, like a lot of other world flags, but in Europe especially, uses a basic tricolor: red, white, and blue, in either the exact same or exact opposite order of what a sideways French flag looks like, depending on which way you flip it. Currency-wise, it should not be a surprise that the Netherlands uses the euro, and economically, the country has the 5th largest economy in the EU, only being beaten by Spain, Italy, France, and Germany, and is the 4th richest country in the organization by GDP per capita, only behind Denmark, Ireland, and Luxembourg. The Netherlands is the 5th country of the Inner Six I've talked about in this video, and is one of the founding members of the predecessor to the European Union, the European Economic Community, which was founded via the Treaty of Rome in 1957. Italy. A country well known for its great food, great history, and tourist hotspots throughout, and being the final member of the Inner Six I'll be talking about in this video. Italy was a monarchy for the vast majority of its time as a unified entity, but eventually the monarchy was abolished and a republic was established after an institutional referendum in 1946. The modern Italian Republic, or Repubblica Italiana, I definitely butchered that pronunciation, in Italian, is specifically a parliamentary republic, in which the head of state, that is, the Italian president, is primarily ceremonial, but does appoint the head of the government, that being the Prime Minister, an elected official who has the political power, while the Italian Parliament is primarily responsible for legislative duties. Language-wise, Italy is in a similar situation to France, with Italian being the only official language, but there are also several other regional languages spoken in the country. The Italian flag has a simple but very good design. 3 vertical stripes with 3 colors, those being green, white, and red. There are a few explanations floating around about the symbolism, though. Some say these colors have military symbolism, with the white and red symbolizing Milan, and the green the Milanese civic guard. Others believe that the symbolism is religious, with the green representing hope, the white faith, and the red charity. The most common explanation, though, is the colors representing Italy's history and geography, with the green representing the plains and hills, the white representing the snowy alpine areas in the north that border Switzerland and Austria, and the red, the blood spilled in the country's wars of independence. By far, when it comes to religion, Italy is overwhelmingly Catholic, likely due to influence from the Vatican City, which Italy completely surrounds. However, it should also be noted a whopping 11.7% of Italy's population is non-religious, though this is nowhere near as high as in some other countries, and only 2.6% of the nation's populace follow religions other than Christianity. Rome, the capital of Italy, is one of Europe's oldest cities, and as I said in my video about the top 10 most populous European cities, linked to that in the description, Rome was the first city ever to have more than 1 million people. However, Italy also has other large and well-known cities, such as Naples, Venice, Florence, and Milan, that also rake in not just a lot, but occasionally almost too many tourists. Speaking of tourists, tourism is one of the big sectors of the Italian economy, which is the 3rd largest in the EU behind only France and Germany. In terms of GDP per capita, Italy finds itself much further down, only having the 13th largest GDP per capita amongst EU nations. However, just like Germany, Italy also has a major economic divide. Not between East and West, though, but between North and South, as Northern Italy tends to be a lot more economically prosperous than Southern Italy, Sardinia, and Sicily are. Unsurprisingly, Italy uses the euro, but again, not all EU members do, and is the sixth and final member of the Inner Six that will be talked about in this video and this series, and is one of the 6 founding members of the EU. Ireland. The primary country that controls most of the island of Ireland, the Republic of Ireland, is actually even younger than Belgium, as while Belgian independence was achieved from the Netherlands in 1830, Ireland achieved its freedom from the thumb of London almost a century later in 1922. The design of the Irish flag is somewhat similar to the Italian flag, with very similar shades of green and white, but the red at the far right of the flag is replaced by orange. Also, keep in mind that the flag of Ireland is, in reality, actually also significantly wider than the Italian flag, and most flags in Europe for that matter. Currency-wise, Ireland uses the euro like most of the EU, and economically, the country is surprisingly impressive, with the Irish economy being the 9th largest in the European Union. Where Ireland really never fails to shock me, though, is in GDP per capita, as Ireland has the 2nd largest GDP per capita in the EU, only behind the much smaller country of Luxembourg, as I mentioned earlier in the video. Unlike its only neighbor, the United Kingdom, which is a constitutional monarchy, but is not in the EU, so it won't be talked about in this video, Ireland is a parliamentary republic, with the Irish president as head of state and prime minister being head of government. Said president is one of the constituent parts of the Irish parliament, which goes by the name of that. With the other being the 2 houses of that name, I'm absolutely gonna butcher if I try to say it. Obviously, as with most countries, the capital of Ireland, Dublin, is the most well-known city in the country outside the country. But there are, of course, other relatively large metropolitan areas like Cork in Ireland, just like anywhere else. Religion-wise, Ireland is overwhelmingly Catholic, as opposed to the neighboring UK, which is predominantly Protestant. And although the primary language of the country is English, the native language, Irish, isn't dead yet, and still spoken by a handful of the nation's population, meaning that while it's not dead, it is hanging by a thread. Ireland was one of the first countries to join the EU that isn't one of the Inner 6 founding members, with Ireland joining the EU, well, EEC really, alongside Denmark and the UK, the latter of which would eventually leave and thus will not be talked about in any other part of the series, on January 1st, 1973. Denmark. One of 3 Nordic nations that would join the EEC, which would end up becoming the EU, Denmark, similar to Norway and Sweden, is a constitutional monarchy, in which the Danish monarchy is almost entirely ceremonial, with the ruling monarch as the country's head of state, while the head of government is the prime minister, similar to Europe's other monarchies, 3 of which, Belgium, the Netherlands, and Luxembourg, I've already talked about. The only official language of Denmark, Danish, is very similar to other Nordic languages, such as Norwegian and Swedish, and in their standard forms at least, Norwegian, Swedish, and Danish are believed to be mutually intelligible with each other, or at the very least, are very similar to each other. And just to be clear, Finnish is not a Nordic language, as it's not even Indo-European, and is closer to other Uralic languages like Hungarian than it is to Swedish or any of the Nordic languages. By a mile, the largest city in Denmark is, unsurprisingly, the capital city of Copenhagen, while several other Danish cities are smaller and far less known about outside Denmark than the giant that is the Danish capital, Copenhagen. And even though Denmark is officially a predominantly Lutheran nation, that's because many Danes are indeed registered with the Danish Lutheran Church. But the thing is that not only do most Danes not openly practice a religion despite adhering to it on paper, just like in the rest of Scandinavia, religion is seen as a much more private matter in Denmark than in the US or some other areas of Europe. In terms of currency, Denmark is an outlier in that the nation does not use the euro, instead using the Danish krone as its currency. The flag of Denmark is very similar in design to the other Nordic flags, with a crimson red background and a white cross going through the flag. This general design is known as the Nordic Cross and is used by all 5 Nordic nations. Economically, Denmark has the 11th largest economy in the EU, but ranks much higher in terms of GDP per capita, with the country having the 3rd highest GDP per capita in the European Union, behind only Ireland and Luxembourg. Also, it should be noted that Denmark is one of a few countries left in the EU with active conscription, in which all Danish males over 18 are required to serve from anywhere from 4 months to a year. Here, Denmark joined the EEC on the same day as Ireland and the UK, January 1st, 1973. Greece. Finally, the last country I'll be talking about for part 1 of this series. Greece has a long and rich history, and although the country's only official language, Greek, is really old and unique among European languages due to not using either the Latin or Cyrillic alphabet, ancient Greek and modern Greek are actually not very similar, and are actually really different in quite a handful of ways, which I'm not going to go into. The flag of Greece has changed throughout the country's history, from the Greek monarchy to a military junta in between, all the way to a democratic republic that still stands all the way into the present day. But white and blue have remained the main colors. The modern Greek flag has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 horizontal stripes in alternating white and blue, with a blue square with a white cross in the top left. The white cross is symbolic of Greek Orthodoxy, which is just the overwhelmingly predominant religion in the country. Surprisingly though, unlike in the case of other countries in the Balkans, Greece doesn't have a notably large Muslim minority, with Muslims only making up anywhere from 0.91 to 2% of the Greek population, most of whom live in Thrace. Just like Rome, the capital of Greece, Athens, is a famously really old city, and is also famous for being the birthplace of the concept of democracy. Speaking of democracy, while Greece was a monarchy for most of the time it was an independent state, starting from when it gained independence from the Ottoman Empire, not so in the present day. Today, Greece has been a parliamentary republic ever since the end of the military junta, in which the president, who is elected by the Hellenic Parliament, is the head of state, and such role is mostly ceremonial, while the prime minister is the head of government. Greece, like most of the European Union, uses the euro and is also another one of a handful of countries in Europe and or the EU that still have conscription, with Greek males aged 18 to 45 being required to serve in the armed forces from anywhere from 9 to 12 months. Now, there have been quite a few memes, especially in certain communities, about Greece's economy being in the dump, and it is true. Kind of. While Greece isn't doing too bad in terms of the size of its economy, with the country boasting the 16th largest economy in the EU, what Greece is doing really badly in is debt, with Greece having a debt to GDP ratio of 152%. Though it's not nearly as bad now as it was in 2020, when that same debt to GDP ratio was a whopping 207%. Unfortunately, Greece also doesn't do too well in terms of GDP per capita, with Greece having the second smallest GDP per capita in the European Union, only behind Bulgaria. That's not to say Greece is doing bad by any means. While the country is relatively poor by European standards, it's still doing a lot better than quite a few other countries. Greece joined the EU 8 years after Denmark and Ireland in 1981, a little over a decade before the EEC would become the EU. So there you have it, part 1 of the Every Country in the European Union Explained series. We hope you enjoyed this video. Like, share, and subscribe if you want to. Stay tuned for part 2, and as always, I'll see you in the next video. Edward here from Edward279, the Mixed Content Creator, signing out.